Our guest today grew up in Manchester, the son of two Irish parents. He got his start not in film, but in theatre and on television, working on programmes like Inspector Morse. Over the years, he built up a reputation as one of this generation's greatest filmmakers through his vibrant and visceral direction of films like Shallow Grave, Trainspotting, and a little movie called 28 Days Later. In 2007, his film Slumdog Millionaire won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and he took home the Oscar for Best Director. The London 2012 Olympics brought about an iconic cultural celebration as his artistry touched the whole world when he directed the opening ceremony. He describes himself as just a storyteller. Upon watching his latest film, 28 Years Later, I'm sure you'll all agree he is that and much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Danny Boyle.
So this award thing,
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so actually it's interesting. Ray Fiennes is in this film. Ray Fiennes received this award. Yeah, he sat in that chair, I think about 20 years ago. So he has it. James Joyce it was Bloomsday this week, of course, and James Joyce was one of the members of the society back in the late 1800s, and he ran for auditor, the chair of the society, but he failed. So in about 1998, we decided to dedicate this award to him and his memory and his legacy. And we invite guest talented filmmakers like yourself in then to celebrate your work.
Right, cool. So you know the Jack Benny joke when he received a prestigious literary award. He said, I don't deserve this, but I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. No, in fact, I have read Ulysses 3 times, up to page 200 each time. That's my main qualification for being here.
Danny, your parents grew up in Ireland. When you were growing up in Manchester, did you feel that sort of sense of Irish community or that connection to Ireland, travelling back in the summer?
I didn't no, not really. Something you take for granted. I think my mother's influence on me is strongest, funnily enough. I got all my energy from my father, but my mother's influence was strongest, and she failed in her attempt to turn me into a priest, which was a disappointment I could never compensate for with all the film awards in the world, and even the James Joyce Award wouldn't compensate her for me not becoming a priest, but because she was a very devout woman. But you appreciate it all as you get older, actually, funnily enough. You take it for granted to begin with, and then you appreciate it as you get older, you know. Yeah. I mean, Manchester's got a lot of Irish exiles in it, you know, so. In fact, I used to go to this cinema called the Aben Cinema, which has been knocked down now. It's in Hume in Manchester, and it showed really arty movies, which I didn't really understand, but I used to sit there in endless screenings with them. And apparently, Morrissey, who's also of Irish extraction, and he's the same age as me, was in that cinema as well. He used to spend most of his time there as well. I never met him, but anyway, a fact you didn't need to know, but now you do. Yeah.
I suppose then that was kind of one career path that you could have gone down and joined the seminary and become a priest. What point did you kind of think filmmaking, getting involved in production, TV production, was kind of a path that you could follow?
So everybody says, what film was it that you saw that made you want to be a film director? And it wasn't. It was a poster I saw. So when I went to London and lived in London, starting off in London, there was this poster, and it was huge for the time. It was an enormous poster, and it was all black, and it had just white writing on it, and it just said "Apocalypse Now." And I remember seeing that, thinking, "That's what I want to do. I want to make films like that." And I hadn't seen it yet, and I've seen it, and it's a fantastic film. And in fact, weirdly, there's a kind of reference to it in here. The Kurtz type figure, the Ray Fiennes Kelson figure, is meant to invoke feelings in you of Kurtz again. But so that shows its lasting impression. So it's that poster. I remember vividly the feeling, thinking, "Oh, I'll do that. I'll be a film director."
Yeah, that's amazing. And then afterwards, you moved in and worked in the Royal Court Theatre for a while, and then you moved to Northern Ireland and produced a film for Alan Clarke called Elephants.
Yes.
How was that time spent in Northern Ireland, kind of shooting that film with him? And did you learn anything or gain an experience kind of that you took with you then throughout your career?
With Alan?
With Alan,
yeah. He was an incredible filmmaker, a completely original touch. And he taught you not to invent, really, not to go classical, just not to do it like everybody else is doing it, not to make it like your last film, just to step out constantly and invent. And he made this extraordinary film, because we weren't directly making films about the Troubles, as they were called, but we did want to make this one called Elephant, which we sort of made together. I sort of wrote it, though it wasn't really writing, in the strictest sense, certainly not in the James Joyce sense. But we had a wonderful time there. I loved Belfast, and it was pivotal to me getting started with a camera, really, because I applied for the job. They wouldn't appoint any internal appointments at the BBC at that time because of all the troubles, because of whether it was going to be a Protestant or a Catholic would get the job, would kick cause. So they appointed outsiders, people from the mainland, kind of England and Scotland and Wales. So I applied for the job. And I got it, and I, as a producer, and I found out later that nobody else had applied, because it was quite a tough time in Northern Ireland. But I knew I had friends there anyway, and it's a wonderful place. Despite the occasional bomb, which you just got used to. It was just like you do, like people live in Gaza now, and they get used to it. It's just horrific, but we're extraordinary creatures like that. What we can somehow get through, Anyway, I'm not comparing it to that, but I learned a huge amount from Alan and from being in Belfast and amongst the people of Belfast and the people of Derry. Yeah, especially the people of Derry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose this is a collab with FilmSoc, one of the other societies in the college. So I suppose you moved then from directing Inspector Morse, I think you did 2 episodes, to directing films. What would your advice be to young filmmakers to kind of break into the industry and to make that move from, say, film or television to film?
Oh, well, I think what's crucial, and it seems counterintuitive, especially if you're thinking of it, is not to pay too much attention to people like me, because I'm over, and cinema is a vampire for young ideas. That's what you want when you're the only people who go to cinema. People my age don't go. We're pointless. It's you go to cinema. And what you want when you go is you want to see something new that reflects not what you've been told by your mum and dad or your teachers or anything like that. You want to see what you think. And the only way to get that through is for you to do it. And it seems like a really kind of like we think, well, that won't lead anywhere. But listen, the other stuff, that revering older so-called masters, it reveals nothing, It's an amazing industry like that. All I can tell you from having been inside it for a while is the more outrageous you are with it, the better chance you have with it, really. But I mean, if you want to make Jane Austen adaptations, that's fine as well. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's the appetite that's there if you want to address that, And what's important to that is your peer group. Not what people like my age think, it's what your mates think, people you want to work with, and you'll find the people you should work with, the people who you write with, or the people that you edit with, or the people that you act with. It's your peer group that matter, because one day you'll be 40, think, what the fuck did I do? What did I do with that energy, those ideas, use them, that's all. You've got a great start being here, obviously, but compared to some people, but that's so when that question gets asked, that's what I always say, because it's absolutely true,
And you had that energy, and you kind of brought it into those early films, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting. What is it that kind of makes your films more visceral and vibrant? When you look at a script, what's your first thoughts? How are you kind of transitioning it from the page to the screen?
It's the same thing that you'll all have, and it applies to different things. You just have a connection with a piece of writing or an idea or an ambition, something that you have that you want to do, and it may not make sense. When we did Slumdog, that first third of the film we said we're going to do in Hindi, and people thought that was insane at the time. Now, TikTok uses subtitles all the time, so suddenly subtitles are Not a problem. Back then it was like, there's going to be subtitles in the film, forget it. Like nobody in America will go and see a film with subtitles of any kind. They'll just immediately cancel the film. They won't go to see it. Now, so it changes, and it's kind of like you just follow your instincts and go with them. And obviously you have to be a bit cunning. I'm not saying be naive. You have to exercise some cunning at certain moments, but you'll learn what those are and when necessary to apply them, yeah.
With Slumdog, you moved out to Mumbai for a year, and you kind of didn't take a big crew with you. You hired loads of local kind of filmmakers. Yeah. How was that experience in that year in Mumbai filming Slumdog?
Well, if you've been to India, you've got to go. I mean, I didn't see that much of India. I just stayed in Mumbai. It's a complete narcotic. It's just so addictive. You just cannot leave it once you've got there. There's so much life there, and some people find it totally repellent. And they just flee from it, because it's an assault on all your sensory, what you thought were your sensory antennae before. You'll realize that you've barely been experiencing anything. You just get there and it's just full on apart from about 2 a.m. to about 4 a.m. where if you drive around then, there's sort of nothing happening. Everybody's asleep for a bit. And then it just kicks in again. It's what New York must have been like at the turn of the century. I mean, it's phenomenal, the opportunity and Anyway, all life is there. It's just, if you want to ever read a book about it, read the Suketu Mehta book, Maximum City. That is an amazing book, just as a recommend. If you want to feel, I mean, it's probably a bit out of date now, but if you want to feel what that place is like, read that book, yeah.
Making films in different genres, say Yesterday, a musical, Steve Jobs, a biopic, are there rules to different genres that you have to apply when you're making a film, and can you break those rules kind of? And even with 28 years later, were the rules you found making the first film at 28 days later?
Well, I was very proud, indeed, nay, arrogant about the fact that I appeared to work in different genres. And then I was doing like a press tour like this is part of for a film, and French journalists are different. They're quite kind of something quite different about French journalists. I don't know whether it's the natural antipathy between the French and the English, or whether it's just their attitude to film is just different. Anyway, so I was doing this, and this French woman, this journalist, said to me, I did my spiel about, I work in different genres, I like to do blah, 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 blah. She said, all your films are the same. I said, sorry? She said, all your films are exactly the same film, made over and over and over again, just looking slightly different. I said, oh, really? Yeah, she said, they're all about a young man, and it's always a young man, she said, with a roll of her eyes, and he's always overcoming impossible obstacles. And that was it. So that took me down a peg or two, and that's absolutely right. I think you do remake the same film again and again and again, and you try to disguise it, and genre helps.
And I think with Trainspotting and Shallow Grave, you found a writing partner in John Hodge, and then with the 28 Days and 28 Years, you found Alex Garland. How do you find that writer-director dynamic, and what inspired you then to come back to this franchise 23 years after the first? They're
wonderful examples of writers. I don't know if you're writing, if you want to write screenplays, but have a look at the way they write screenplays. If you write screenplays with lots of description in it, you certainly won't attract a visually interesting director, because if you're laying it all out, like, the trees blow in the wind and, blah, blah, not like you're writing a novel or something. A novelist is a film director. The novelist is doing everything. But a screenwriter is setting up potential for then the partner, the director, to arrive and to investigate what you've written. So they write very sparingly, very few words, but you get the idea of the characters and the circumstance of the situation. So like Alex always quotes Walter Hill as a writer, another writer who wrote like that, very, very sparsely. Wonderful screenwriting, it really is. Rather than what you might think is good screenwriting is lavish descriptions, it's not at all. It soaks energy out of the screenplay if you do that. So coming then to 28 years later, why now, after 23 years, would you return to the franchise? Because it was excellent, and it explored such a new aspect of how the virus developed after 28 years. And what was the inspiration to come back to that? Well, it was a mixture. It was actually when you make films, they fade. Some of them fade very quickly when they're a flop, and they just disappear. And then some of them fade, even when they're a hit, they just fade away. but this one didn't 28 days later. And I kept getting invited to screenings. And I went because like to help support cinema, and I'd do a Q&A after them. But they weren't nostalgic. They were like vibrant. They were like, oh, bloody hell. And the film didn't feel like it had aged. It was like, and so we Alex and I began to talk about, could we do something else about it? And so we came up with this idea, and it was actually in cahoots with Cillian Murphy. So Kill, who's in the first film, will eventually appear. We decided to make 3 films, 2 of which we've shot and the third of which we're trying to raise the money for. And the first film, as you've seen, I think, doesn't feature him at all, except as a producer. But at the end of the second film, in the way that Jack O'Connell appears at the end of this film as a character, Cillian does that at the end of the second film. And then the third film is his film. So it was a bribe to get financiers to consider something ridiculous, like a trilogy about a completely British landscape with just with nobody American in it, and Cillian Murphy is the pocket of gold at the end of it, at the end of the rainbow, you know. So that's what we used him for, and he was delighted to be able to use like that. So that's what we're attempting to do. And sorry.
I heard a rumor before I saw this film that this film is about Brexit, and there was an allegory there. And I kind of thought to myself, I don't see how that could be possible. Then I saw the film, and I was kind of saying, this does have something to say about isolationism and being removed from Europe, and that. How conscious is the kind of the political messaging when you're kind of directing a film? Is it a conscious kind of thing or an unconscious?
I think it's usually unconscious, but because you're alive and living through the politics of the day, it bleeds in. I think horror as a genre is really amazing, the way that you can put transparencies of issues kind of float across it sometimes. You read different things in it at different times. There's a bit of Brexit in it, COVID obviously, and the horrors around the world you can read against it at different times. So the origin of the zombie horror movie is Romero, obviously, and for those of you who know any of his films, he would use class, race, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, commerce, you know, the increasing commercialization of individuals. Those would all be transparencies that would pass across these films like that. And it's just a natural genre for doing that. So some of it's just you're alive at the time and stuff will bleed in, and some of it you do emphasize slightly because you know it'll flex to absorb that without it becoming a political film, you know, in a specific way.
I think we're lucky here because this kind of audience has seen the film, so I can kind of then explore the idea with Jodie Comer's character and that really strong maternal bond between Spike and Isla. How important was that to you to kind of convey that and then have that emotional impact at the end of the film?
Well, it's obviously this island, the choices that they'd made without. It's a really interesting question. If technology erases, it vanishes, stops dead overnight, do we continue to evolve, as in progress, as people, as a society? It's a really interesting question. And the more we get dependent on the technology, the harder the question will be to answer. They have answered it by looking back to an England, and they fill their new kids' minds with cultural myths of England old, you know, which is the Henry V stuff, which is the long bowmen of England who defeated the French at Agincourt. So they're looking back to like the 14th century. And you know where that comes from? You know, like when somebody says "fuck off," like that, and then politicians turn it into, from Churchill onwards, turn it into victory. It actually comes from it comes from that battle between the French and the English, because when the French used to capture the archers, the English archers, they cut off their fingers, because then there was nothing they could do. They couldn't fight anymore. They couldn't fight, so they cut their fingers off. So when the English were victorious, they went like that to the French to say, you didn't beat us. So it's sort of looking back to that kind of mythology. Anyway, and there's a St. Crispin's Day speech, which is the speech from Henry V, you know, about we few, we band of brothers. That's where Band of Brothers comes from, that phrase that they used for that TV thing. You know, that's where it comes from. So that's the education that is on offer. They've gone very much back to gender stereotypes. The girls stay at home and provide the food. The boys go out and be warriors. Yeah, and that's what Aaron Taylor-Johnson, as the father, is teaching the kid. Follow in my footsteps. This is the way we do. We go out to defend our precious home, etc. She teaches him something much more subtle, I think. And certainly it was interesting seeing the relationship of the actors. So Aaron, this young lad, Alfie, is just a 12, 13-year-old guy. And you know, and he's following Aaron, and Aaron's teaching him how to be an action actor. You know, prepping before a scene, push-ups, fucking get the heart pounding, and kind of, you know, and it's this kind of mentality. And that's perfect for that kind of role. And then Jodie is much more interior, and she teaches him something much more, it's much subtler and more precious. And it's more about him witnessing her with the baby, you know, the child in the train carriage, and she teaches him kind of intangible things, and it's the passing on. It's actually the passing on of maternal love. And it's, of course, as a young man, he's got this baby, he takes it back, so it's looked after at the island, but he doesn't choose to follow his father's footsteps. And I think that's Jodie's influence, Isla's influence on him, completed by Kelson, yeah.
And Alfie Williams, the young kid, he was fantastic. How did that casting come about? Was that an open net? Because he was an absolute find. He's sure to be a star.
Well, I made a film like 20 years ago featuring two boys at that age. You see, the French journalist was right. It's always a boy. And I was looking for a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old then. And the standard is noticeably higher now when you look at kid actors. And it's Harry Potter that's to blame. Because kids look at Harry Potter and go, oh, I could do that. I can do it like that. And they sound like me. You know, the accent's rough. It's not some Hollywood glamour thing. It's like, oh, yeah, I could do that. So the standard generally is written much higher. But he was exceptional. You have to narrow, when you look for kids, you have to narrow down straight away. Because obviously there's 400 million kids who are 12 years old. You can't audition them all. You know, so you narrow it down by going, we'll just look in Newcastle, because our film was set on Holy Island, and the biggest town, closest town to it is Newcastle. So we thought we'll look in Newcastle, and the kids were exceptional, and he was clearly head and shoulders above them, you know, in terms of ability. Yeah,
he's absolutely fantastic. I read recently that you'd one regret when it came to the Olympic opening ceremony, and that was not celebrating the BBC more because of the times that we live in now. When 28 Days Later came out, there was a lot to be said about the rage virus and kind of people's tensions in society. Do you think kind of 23 years later that's increased and we're more tense and there's probably more rage out there? And what do you put that down to?
Well, I think we all put it down to phones, don't we? I think they've made us feel very powerful, which is the brilliant con. And actually we're not any more powerful than we were before we had phones. And that imbalance between how you're made to feel and the reality of the world creates frustration. I think that's my pocketbook analysis of it, because it's the only thing that's really changed that much since we made the first film, and it's definitely worse. There's definitely less tolerance. People go from 0 to 100 in terms of temper, or they seem to. Whereas when we did the first film, it was just based on road rage, you know, that which is a very specific and kind of and not that visible, but something everybody could empathise with, because we've all felt like that in a motor car. But now it seems prevalent kind of on the streets much more, between passers-by, people just bumping into each other, and it just seems much. I don't know if it's the same in Ireland, I'm sure it is, but it's certainly true in where I live, yeah.
And it's that dichotomy, because back then, 28 Days Later was released you made it on digital video, and it was the first film to get a widespread release. This film then was filmed with iPhone 15, so you've got the good of technology and you've got the bad. How did you find recording the film on iPhone 15s, and what was that experience like, kind of testing a new format?
Well, it's in everybody's pockets, and they shoot at 4K now. In fact, they'll shoot at 60 frames a second at 4K. I wouldn't recommend doing that, because your iCloud storage for little films of your mates will cost you millions to store it in the cloud. But you can, and that's cinema resolution. So there's no fear at all. And new technology, there's so many small cameras. We use GoPros, we use other small cameras on the drones. We use a lot of drones. Drones are going to be a huge part of filmmaking, and not just for top shots, which is what you imagine them. The smaller drones, which can be used indoors, if you can get through the health and safety stuff, and they can bang into people without hurting them. So you can do impact shots with them. Technology's a tool that you've just got to use. It's like AI. It's just a tool. You've got to use it. I mean, you've got to not listen to old people going, "Oh God, technology, it's so frightening." It's like it's a tool. It's just like a pencil. Like you just use it, don't you?
Although I think we've touched on a lot there. You've done TV, film, big events with the Olympics. What's next? Obviously, you have this 28 days, 3 movies. But is there anything else that you want to achieve in the next chapter?
I'd love to do a musical. Like Emilia Perez. Do you see Emilia Perez? So good. That guy's an amazing director, I think. But an original film with original music, it's the most difficult thing to do, without a doubt. It's done it's so rare to see, so difficult to pull off. But yeah, that's
fascinating. And I think that kind of
You've
brings
run out
us
of questions.
to... Well, no, but I think you have a busy evening tonight. You're going into the IFI Gala screening.
Yeah.
That's sure to be a nice event. Cillian Murphy's joining you in there.
Is he?
Is he? No? Oh, thank you so much for coming in. Just one last question on the sort of idea about filmmaking and the religious iconography that came in this film. We saw at the beginning, that opening scene, and hiding under the pews. And then at the end, you see the cross. Is that a hint towards the next film?
Yeah, there's the Jack O'Connell's. So, yeah. So I remember asking Alex Garland, I like writers to just say what it's about in your mind, at some point in the process, either at the beginning or even sometimes at the end. And he said, well, the first film's about the nature of family, and the second film's about the nature of evil. So that's what it's to do with that, yeah.
That's fascinating. And you are a storyteller and much, much more. Thank you so much for coming in to us, Danny. And we're so
this is my medallion.
This is your medallion,
oh,
yeah.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, my certificate.
That's your certificate. Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, no, it's grand. No, well done. It's grand.